Welcome to episode 2 of The Brain for 2026. I'm Peter Csathy of Creative Media. In this episode, I speak with one of the sharpest minds I know in the world of AI, media, and entertainment, Andy Beach, former CTO and Chief of AI Strategy for Microsoft and its Media and Entertainment Group. Andy advises companies now, and his work explores how AI is transforming content creation, audience engagement, and the architecture of modern media ecosystems. Because he comes from the world of big tech, he and I come at things a bit differently sometimes, and we don't always see eye to eye. But that's part of the fun, and I always learn something in the process. We cover a lot of grounds in our 45-minute session, including Apple's decision to go with Google Gemini to power Apple Intelligence, Disney's surprising $1 billion deal with OpenAI, Microsoft's AI publisher content marketplace, AI's capability versus AI's default control, a topic near and dear to Andy since it gets to the fundamental question of the role of humans in the creative process, and finally, Matthew McConaughey's efforts to trademark himself and why it matters. All right. So with that, here's my conversation with Andy Beach. Andy Beach, welcome to The Brain.
Peter, thank you so much. It's so good to see you again.
It is good to see you again. Happy belated New Year to you.
Thank you. It's been an interesting start to the year for sure, but we jumped right into it very quickly, and I'm looking forward to having a new year to dive into.
Absolutely. So where are you today, Andy?
I am in Portland, Oregon, where I live, but I'm actually in the midst of getting ready to spend my next 2 weeks in South America working on a couple of different projects. So I'm busily packing and getting myself ready to be on the road.
Well, as an AI and media strategist should do. So Andy Beach from Alchemy Creations, former CTO of Microsoft and the Media and Entertainment Group. And that's how I got to know Andy. And Andy, we're going to get right into it. A lot of topics to cover. We're going to go pretty rapid fire. I want to spend most of the time on a topic that you feel particularly passionate about from what it seems, which is in the media and creative industries, AI's capabilities versus AI's like controls, the default controls.
Yeah.
I definitely want to get into that and, just hear your take on over all of it. But first, just a couple of like recent headlines, and curious to get your thoughts, given the fact that you're so deep and you know a lot of the players in the space. What is your reaction to Apple's decision to go with Google to power Apple Intelligence?
Yeah. It's an interesting one. And, I think it speaks into a little bit of that default that we'll talk about later. But I think it was ultimately a fairly smart decision. I think a lot of people have felt that Apple is a little behind some of the other major providers in terms of what they're doing with intelligence. But by making this partnership, they're not really ceding ownership of Siri or intelligence and search to someone else. They're still what they've done is they've sort of made Apple Intelligence a coordination layer now. And they'll have the ability to partner with a variety, potentially long-term, of replaceable models and engines under the hood that do it. So they're really effectively just offloading and outsourcing compute. But they didn't outsource the intelligence part because they're still sort of defining the control mechanisms of how that system will respond to the user and how the user interacts with it. So I think there's a lot of value in moving forward like this because it doesn't leave them, it gives them the feature capabilities that their consumers are going to expect because they're seeing it everywhere else, but it doesn't put them on this sort of chasing train where they're constantly trying to push new competitive features out into the wild. They can collaborate and partner with somebody on it. And Gemini is a great one to be doing it with right now, but there may be something that's totally unique and different that comes up in 2 years, and they'd have the flexibility of potentially making a new partnership around that.
So it's what Apple does best, which is user experience, right? Simplifying all of that. And so in a way, the way you described it, it sounds almost analogous to the App Store itself, where it outsourced all these capabilities and, delighted the Apple faithful and created the environment for all these different apps to live rather than having the responsibility for creating them all themselves. And that's what really supercharged the iPhone in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's a good analogy. And I think the search engine analogy, just going back to the partnership they originally made with Google around making that the default, they've had different relationships through the years around that. It didn't mean that they weren't the mechanism that was driving it, but it gave everybody sort of this front page and this easy search. In many ways, the LLMs are a new version of that search conversation.
Yeah, makes total sense. And then another recent headline that I've followed very, very closely is the OpenAI deal, or Disney's deal with OpenAI to invest $1 billion and license its beloved intellectual property. So the Star Wars, Marvel, Disney princesses, and so on. And what did you think? Did that surprise you? Because you're deep in the tech side and the entertainment world.
It sort of surprised me only in the sense that there's sort of a funny story of there's this working assumption, I think, in the industry that December is a dead and quiet month. And so after Thanksgiving, everybody's just like, there's not gonna be a lot of news. We're all gonna start just wrapping up. And this dropped like into the first week or the beginning of the second week of December. And it sucked all the oxygen out of every conversation I had for probably about 5 days, where everybody was like, why do you think they did that? How do you think this happened? So I think it's fascinating, and I am very interested in it. I want to see the implementation of it and how it actually gets presented once you can actually sort of interact with these characters and the IP. But as I dug into it and researched and read, it's an incredibly strong and powerful deal. It's sort of Disney bringing classic Hollywood style partnerships and investments into an AI and tech area, effectively, is how I think of it.
From your understanding, how much of that $1 billion was actual cash infusion from Disney into OpenAI?
Yeah, it's a big chunk of it, because I know that they took stock and options as part of this. I don't remember the exact numbers because I've gotten far enough away from the original story, so I don't remember the exact number. But it was a fair amount of a cash injection that they're getting, and then importantly, there were options for them to be able to go further later if they decided as part of this.
Which is a pretty standard way of doing
absolutely
IP licensing and equity investments through warrants. And back in the day when I was negotiating deals on behalf of a company called Music Match, it was the first on-demand music streaming licenses. And so we were making it up, like setting the stage for the first licensing deals with the majors. And the majors would license, and as part of the license that they would grant us, they would get warrants, so equity in the company. So I haven't seen the terms of the settlement or of the deal, the agreement, the investment into the company. I haven't seen that, but I would imagine that, most people probably think it's $1 billion of cash. I highly doubt it's $1 billion of cash.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's going to be a combination of some cash, whatever that may be. And it sounds like, from your perspective, from what you hear, there's a sizable amount of that. And then there's the, licensing of the characters and the equity that comes from that is valued at a certain amount.
Well, and don't forget, there was also deals for enterprise agreements around OpenAI usage by every Disney employee that's part of this. So they're now sort of officially, contractually a customer of OpenAI, not just an investor, meaning that they will have the ability to leverage it in a lot of different ways internally, not just creative, but in enterprise office work and other areas, which classically they have blocked and barred the use of AI by their legal teams and by executives for a long time, and have slapped a lot of hands for people that were doing it. One of the things that I found most fascinating was sort of that the whole agreement around, yes, OpenAI is getting characters, very specifically characters, not people. So,
Yes.
Anything with a mask.
We'll get into that because of the actors that actors
absolutely.
like Tom Cruise are not part of this.
And you're not getting voices, you're getting environments. So you're not, all those other pieces. But anything that gets made within Sora by OpenAI and by the people that are using it, just us consumers that are using Sora, the rights to that content is with Disney. So they
Yeah.
retain the rights of all of it. So that was very smart of them to pull that, and I think further adding it to giving it a distribution route, not just saying we're not only going to own it and then say, quietly smother it on the side. We're going to own it, and we have the right to put it into Disney Plus in some way if we want to use it. If someone, in other words, if you or I come up with a really funny, cool thing that Donald Duck can do, we might be able to send a clip of it from Disney Plus to our friends, and we're not going to be making any money off of it, but we have street cred.
Yeah. Do you think that, just really quickly, because we'll move on to other things, but do you believe that the vision here ultimately from Disney is that it will make its characters available for Sora, yes, but that there will be some kind of micropayments for any use by a user in that, so that it's another new revenue stream for Disney?
Sure. That's a great question, and nothing in this deal today speaks to that, but it sort of paves a road to getting to that as a future business upgrade that could potentially happen. And I think that could be a two-way street of not just me paying Disney to use it in a specific scenario, but and maybe it won't be Disney that does this, but the next company that has IP that they want to license in a similar way, maybe they have micropayments back to somebody if they do something that's incredibly cool and they want to leverage it. They find a way to compensate you, not just acknowledge you as part of it, and that becomes a whole interesting new fork of where this technology and this business model could go.
Yeah, I completely agree. I believe that the most interesting part of the deal for me, beyond the initial shock, and I'll tell you why, because I'm a lawyer as well,
Right.
an IP lawyer, and I've dealt with Disney for decades actually. And Disney is notoriously the most
Aggressive.
yeah, aggressive yes, good word. Aggressive when it comes to the just preserving its intellectual property and making sure that others can't use it without consent. So
there was a great timing. In addition to this OpenAI Disney deal, the same week that came out, they sent cease and desist letters to Google,
right,
saying,
exactly.
"Oh, by the way, Gemini, you're naughty because you're getting too close to all of our characters, and you need to knock it off." And so I think it was almost a great carrot and stick example of the legal team
100%.
saying, "There's absolutely a way forward for you to use our technology, but it costs money, and it's a relationship and it's a deal. You can't just use it for free."
Yeah. And, I feel that's the right way to go. We've, talked about a lot before, intellectual property rights issues, et cetera. But the most interesting part of the deal for me, apart from the fact that it was surprising that you have OpenAI and Disney, like the keeper of the IP flame for the creative community, and OpenAI, which many in the creative community don't feel is a great player, getting together and doing this. But the ability, one of the use cases of AI that I've always felt is a significant unlock, is giving generative AI tools to super fans,
Yeah.
and then giving them the ability to license particular content that is near and dear to them. So like if I'm a Star Wars guy, to be able to license the use of Darth Vader and create videos on my own, as long as I have the right to be able to do that. I think super fans putting IP, and that can be whether it's like Disney, it could be brands, their logos.
Yeah.
It could be Matthew McConaughey, which I'll touch
get to
upon
that
just
one,
really
right?
quickly.
Yeah.
It could be any of these things, a professional athlete, team, where you make your persona, your IP, and give it to super fans to be able to go to town with and create whatever they want. You can establish the ground rules. There are ways to put it so it can't be like with violence or whatever, at least theoretically. And then there's a payment or not. Mm-hmm. It depends on whoever the IP holder is.
Or at least an attribution.
Yeah, an attribution. And so it's potentially a very scalable new revenue stream. It's definitely can be, when it's controlled like that by the licensor, it can be a great marketing tool for them that keeps their brand alive in between their own creations. So one of the things, and then I'll move on, was Grimes, the artist Grimes, within like 4 months of ChatGPT launching a little over 3 years ago, she came out with something called Elf Tech, where she gave her voice and her music stems, made them available to her fans, and said, hey, go to town with them. No rules. But if something becomes commercially successful and generates revenues, then I get 50%.
Right.
So I think that the super fandom use of IP with consent, I think that's a very cool unlock that I would urge any IP holder or persona with a following to pursue.
I know we need to jump on because we have plenty of things to talk about. One of the things I found most fascinating about this deal is that there will end up being a joint committee between Disney and OpenAI that are continually reviewing, for the life of the relationship and the partnership, the uses of the content and the IP that's going on inside of it. So in other words, they're not just defining once, okay, this is how it can be used, and setting it and then moving on, because that's exactly how we get into problems. These are those defaults that I was talking about. In a way.
Yeah.
I'm just alluding to future conversations here, but they're effectively going to be continually meeting and saying and looking at, okay, this is how the customers are using it, and helping make calls of like, oh, we like this is getting dicey. We don't want it to stray into this area because it's health and safety or sexualized or something else. Those are the big broad swaths, but there might be other subtle things that are in there of like, we don't want it interacting with this other IP in some way, or we don't want to see it doing that. Or they may see things and go, actually, we like that a lot. That's totally fine. And we should promote it and find ways to use it more. This has been a thing that any model AI company has a system or a way that they're doing that. I found it interesting that Disney has a seat at the table for those ongoing conversations for the life of this partnership around the way their IP gets used on it. So they will be very reactive in the moment. They'll be able to tune the cultural uses that are going on with this content through the duration, and therefore not be surprised by it. And again, they might have great ideas that come out of it.
Listen, it sounds like that creative quality control makes total sense. It's going to be interesting to see how implementable it really is. It sounds good.
Yeah.
And then just one final thought. I want to just throw this out there for people who are listening and watching, where Disney probably, I'm sure, was motivated by it's a great experiment, apart from the fact that it has to, figure out a way to partake in a successful way in the new AI world order. But a great precedent for thinking about this and the power of fandom is the movie Frozen. So Frozen, which became the biggest animated hit of all time, its success is largely attributable to the fact that Disney's lawyers, for the first time, took a hands-off position when people were creating their videos, kids were creating videos, singing to Frozen songs and all those kinds of things. And the Disney lawyers didn't go out and try to tamp that down. They let that flourish, and that created this great marketing buzz that led to the great success. That was one of the large features. So I think that's a great view of just kind of the possibilities with doing this way. But we also touched upon, just really quickly, getting into the IP issues that lead to these licensing deals. But outside of the copyright issues, there's also these persona issues that you and I've talked about before, where there's a whole world of non-copyrightable things like name, image, likeness. So if you're Tom Cruise or Matthew McConaughey, you rationally feel that if your persona, your voice, your likeness is being used in generative AI tools and you're getting nothing out of it, you rightfully feel like, hey, something's going on. And some may even mind, let's say Universal Studios licensed its full video library, movie library for training purposes, for example. Well, maybe Matthew McConaughey, if he's in a Universal movie, he may even have an objection to being part of the training data set without some kind of compensation.
Sure.
So that gets into issues of like biometrics and things like that. But Matthew McConaughey, the big news last week was, or a few days ago, was that he's seeking to trademark himself, his voice, his likeness. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts about the non-copyright, the persona sorts of things that you and I've talked about before, and like where you see that going.
Yeah, I think, it's funny that this made such news in a way, because I think if you work in this world, and I think this is an area you're super familiar with, I'm familiar with it just from the tech perspective of having to deal with the different interactions. But I think some people will use trademark and copyright interchangeable and just sort of assume they're the same thing. And the reality is they are very different. You're absolutely right. Copyright doesn't cover name, image, likeness. It doesn't cover persona or commercial associations, things like that, or your voice. It's for very explicit things. So you do have to have this other mechanism. And in this case, that mechanism is trademark. This is sort of just a first big example of someone taking a proactive stance to protect themselves, but also ensure that they have a mechanism for monetizing it later. I suspect that we'll see lots more of this begin to get built into the contracts that are there.
Yeah.
But I bet there's also services that start to pop up so that people that aren't part of traditional talent management can also do this. Like, it wouldn't shock me if there's not somebody out there working on a business where I could go in and effectively, maybe it's not technically a legal trademark of myself going through the process, although if the company's smart, they're listening to this and they're adding that as a feature. But they could go in and work with me to get all of my name, image, and likeness as some sort of digital stamp that I can then send to anyone that wants to use a version of me. But then I can also use it as a protection mechanism. If I find somebody out there, I'm like, oh, you're not using the legitimate me, you have to take it down. For sure. It's a natural evolution of where we're going with things. And it's only surprising, I think, because people don't fully ever really understand copyright versus trademark until you start into this education process.
No, absolutely. I'm talking with a bunch of agencies, talent agencies, et cetera. And, for everybody out there, here's another really interesting piece of it, of opportunity for anybody who has a following of some kind, Matthew McConaughey or anybody, is that now you have the ability to license out your, persona. Yeah. And so let's say you want to, you're asked to be part of an advertising campaign, and it's not the most fun to do that, but you're willing to do it and collect the check as long as you have some quality control. Well, now Matthew McConaughey, he can be, sitting on a beach having margaritas, and he's doing an ad campaign in Japan. He's doing a new video of some kind over here, and he's just collecting checks because with the generative tools and licensing his persona, and then he has quality control afterwards to make sure that it satisfies him. That's the way that things will be going. I have no doubt.
Yep. Yeah, I tend to agree with it. I think we've talked a lot in the last decade around content rights, and this is the human rights version of that at an infrastructure scale.
100%. And, that gets into, and I'm not going to get into the weeds, biometrics too.
Yeah.
And so as an example, that's something that I've kind of harped on before, where, the sanctity of the human, our personas, control over our personas. And I have no doubt we're going to see some litigation when it comes to that. And as an example, Illinois has a biometrics law with a personal right of action. So I have a feeling that's going to happen. But one final thing before we get into the main topic that I wanted to really kind of explore. Sure. The way you're thinking about it. Former CTO Microsoft has its own publisher content marketplace.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that and how you feel, now that you're outside of the company.
Sure.
Just how you feel about it all.
Well, so I think it's absolutely a smart move on their part. I think it's reactive in a way, but it's proactive for them to do it. So what they've actually done is they've made sort of a supply side deal where they'll make deals with content publishers. which gives them the ability to then use the content, whether it's like news reporting or others that are out there. Business Insider was one of the first big announcements that was made.
Yeah.
They can now provide summarized content that leverages that data, and they'll correctly attribute it back, but they're also paying royalties against the uses of that. So they'll be able to say, and this is the reason I say this is smart, is Google's gotten a lot of flack for a reduction in click-throughs in Google by people doing searches, and then Gemini just providing a summary at the top that is like enough information for 70% of the people that are out there, so they don't bother clicking through to the story. And that click through is how Google, or how the publisher, was making money on that relationship with the search engine. And if that's gone and people are just getting the summarized information without ever clicking through, that's detrimental to their business. And they saw a massive reduction. I think it was as much as sort of a 40% drop in click-throughs was what some publishers were experiencing. So Microsoft is now saying,
just one thing on that. There's the company Tollbit, and Tollbit put out some research and analysis where its numbers were as high as 96% fewer referrals,
right,
because of the behavior you were talking about. But go ahead.
Yeah. So what Microsoft has done is said, okay, great. We're in that summarization business as well with Copilot and other things. So we now want to be able to correctly attribute it back to you, and we'll be able to present you statistics and data around how we used it and pay some defined royalty against it, not unlike what the click-through referral might have been. So I think it's liability management on their side. And it's smart because it allows them it gives them a mechanism for building more of these relationships, which means that content providers can start trusting them as a resource tool, the way that they did Google search engines for so long for that relationship. But it also means that the users of the system will start to trust the data and the answers that they're getting out of this more. We'll start moving past that, oh, this is a hallucination that it made up. Kind of scenario. So I think it was a pretty smart move on their part, and I'd be shocked if others aren't racing to make similar deals if they're in that sort of agent and summarization business.
But how is this any different than one-to-one deals, direct licensing deals between New York Times and Amazon, as an example?
Well, those things just don't scale, and at the end of the day, and there's a lot of other news sources that are out there that would get lost if you were doing this. So by making it more of a sort of a marketplace where you could enter in, like they're still probably going to do direct deals with the biggest entities that are out there, because they'll do larger deals that are outside the scope of this. Not only do we want to have this summarization piece, but maybe we want you for a further training data piece, or maybe we want to do another part of the roadmap of a feature of an AI product specifically with you around it. So those will still be one-off deals that exist, but there's a lot of other companies that would be missed out as part of that fall below the threshold of those one-to-one deals. This gives them a marketplace where anybody can sort of come in and make a relationship. And if they become a major news source for the way that questions get posed or queried, then it might promote their prominence within Microsoft as a content partner. But there'll be plenty out there that are just sort of in there and get minor attributions and minor royalty payments, but aren't a bigger part of the mechanism. And that's how you do this at a scale effectively.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So it's not just for mid-tier, but for those who don't have those publishers, those media companies, IP holders who don't have the size and the mass and the prestige to be able to get the one-to-one attention. Right. So that's interesting. Gannett's another one that Gannett's been very active with Microsoft, but it's announced a series of different initiatives. So it's been proactive, and that's, Andrew Steinberg over there has done a really good job in terms of helping to move things forward.
I think that the Gannett one will be very useful as well for very like regionalized news.
Yeah, local.
Because
Yeah.
news ultimately is local, right? But these deals are made on global basis. And I think a marketplace is how you get that local news and information, the credibility in the relationship that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the strength of Gannett's content. It's that all that the local news, the local stations, all that.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about what you described to me, because I had asked, okay, what are some of the areas what's most interesting to you? And the way you laid it out was the AI capability versus AI default control.
Yeah.
And in the realm of the creative community. So describe what you have in mind.
Yeah. So we get with AI, and it's nobody's fault. We've been highly fixated on capabilities. How smart is it? What does it do? What does the picture that it puts out look like? Can it sound like Matthew McConaughey when it gives me a voice? Like, and we've all been watching it evolve and get better and better. It becomes a scenario of like, oh, it doesn't do this. But invariably there's a conversation that's like, yeah, but in 6 months it might do that. And so it's perfectly reasonable that's been the fixation. But all of these other stories start to creep in around what I think of as the defaults and the control within the system. And I think all of that starts to show up in sort of how the architectures are built or how some of the features go in. So it becomes the questions that I find myself asking a lot in these conversations, which is my data opt-in or opt-out? Is the knowledge of how that is done invisible to me as a user, or is it a very obvious flag that I can turn on or off? When I give it access to something like my Google account, or I tie it to my Office account, what is the data that it's seeing? Do I have a full list of that? What's the personal data? What's the level of proprietary IP or private context and historical behavior that's going? And then what are the outputs that get permitted? Is it just suggestions, or am I allowing it to make decisions? Is it creating a rough draft, or is it executing and delivering an email on my behalf? And that sort of becomes, is AI this advice thing that I'm using, or is it this authoritative thing that I'm using? So those are that's what I mean when I sort of talk about defaults. And that's sort of what I mean when I start talking about control, and where it becomes, a conversation is, how do you override those characteristics? Is it even possible? Was there a mechanism built into the system? How is governance handled on it? I think the news broke last week as well around sort of XAI and Grok, and a lot of the problems they are now having around images, sexualized images that were being created.
Yeah, nudifying.
Yep. And they are now going to have to backpedal and race to put in governance that they sort of intentionally stripped out.
I was going to say, are you sure that they will race to do that? Or maybe they love the publicity of what's going on.
Well, I mean, then they will find themselves regulated in courts and in governance as to where they can actually function as a company and as a product, based on their reactions to that. California and New York are already actively working on things for it. The UK started investigations, and I'm positive this is conversations that they're having in the EU because they've been far ahead of the US around how they think about AI governance. So those become critical as part of it. A long time ago when I was at Microsoft, I used to give one of the talks that I would give, in a slide that I used referred to there being sort of a three-legged stool that AI was always going to be critical to be successful. It was going to need all three legs on the stool. One was, of course, the technology and the company that was creating the technology, and the customer and how they use it and the user interactions that go on. But those are only two of the legs. The other one was regulation and governance. And the reason that I think that is
regulation and governance. What kind of world are you living in, Andy?
I know it's crazy, but like, you do need it. Otherwise you end up with things like this that are happening, or you have technology that runs ahead so unchecked that people simply won't adopt it because they don't have a trust factor in it. So regulation and governance does actually give us I think of it as the guardrails and the brakes on a car. Like I've heard VCs and I've heard technologists complain that things like the EU is slowing them down. It's slowing down their innovation. I think of that as a safety measure, that it's keeping them from harming themselves and it's keeping them from harming us as the consumers of those products. So I do actually think that regulation and governance is an important part. We have to think about how this collectively works, and the governance part isn't going to think about how the technology functions. They don't actually, I think, care at the end of the day. They're definitely not going to understand it, but they're thinking about the implications of it at scale and at a broader way. And they can put in those pieces that a technologist and a technical company then have to think about, that they may not normally, because they get so excited about the process of creating it that they're going to skip over that step. But it's an important step, and it is critical at the end of the day. Now, I think it's absolutely possible to overregulate, and I think you can absolutely smother technology. And so I think it's a balance. I'm not saying we overregulate and we overgovern, but I'm also not saying that we over-engineer and that we over attribute AI technologies into everything. It's a balancing act, and that's why everything has a seat at the table.
But I want to compartmentalize the discussion a little bit around the media and entertainment and just creative, being creative and using these tools. So when you're talking about AI capability versus control, right? So there's going to be regulation, sure, potentially, we'll see. It's nowhere on the horizon seemingly, but the control is really going to be coming from the industry making controls through litigation, through those sorts of things, through, Matthew McConaughey types who are demanding it.
And I think those are the early versions of control. Absolutely.
Yeah, they're early versions of control.
And I think eventually regulation stems from the reactions that I think governing bodies will take those reactions and form them into policies that we all have to adhere to or need to adhere to. Maybe they're recommended in some cases, maybe they're hard lines in others. But biometrics and identity usage will absolutely be one of those early first places, because that's been an early contention of, they're just scraping all of the internet in order to get this. I think we'll start seeing more regulation around how you disclose what went into sort of the recipe that was your technology, and then there will be regulations around what can be used and who and how you have to compensate those that you are using content and material from. And again, we're seeing it play out in the early days as first these one-to-one deals, now maybe this marketplace type scenario that Microsoft is doing. But there might be larger global ways that there might be ultimately more clearinghouses for how that works in the future, whether it's built on blockchain or big cloud compute or other ways.
But let's talk about how creators use this though, because the ultimate control is going to be how creators decide what makes sense for them in terms of how to use it. And for I'm not going to say for all, because there are some creators who are just creating for the sake of creating, what they consider to be great art. I would say, everybody has to make a living, including creators. So if creators have tools that create creative works that are good enough for their purposes, whatever those purposes may be, then they may decide that controls aren't really necessary. It's almost like set it and forget it, versus like when I was thinking about what you had written me, versus, okay, if there's a feeling in the marketplace that actually just setting it and forgetting it isn't going to be as effective, yes, creatively, potentially, in terms of creating like something that really hits home with the consumer or with the audience. And it also, they realize that what monetizes most for them as a business or whatever is going to have more control at the top, with somebody who's manning the ship.
Right.
So that they are still at the top of the food chain creatively, where you have humanity or, the team that's doing that, but using the tools for workflow rather than having the workflow go on itself.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get like your thoughts about, look, I see there are different, there are some who do, some creators, and quite a few of them, who essentially put in a few prompts, let the creation just, take on a life of its own. But then there are creative agencies who are very successful, who look at, and they call themselves AI agencies, as an example, where they still have their creative team that creates the vision for a campaign. They create the script still, and then they just like expedite the process of the execution and the review and approval processes along the way. So instead of, let's say, like a 2-month campaign that costs $100,000, it's going to be done in 3 weeks and for $50,000 or $25,000.
With probably a much smaller team of people, realistically.
Much smaller team of people.
But you probably now have 5 different teams doing that work instead of a single team. In other words, you're outputting more material across a broader swath of people as part of that. You touched on a thing, and I know this was in some of your notes that you had shared about where AI sits in the stack, and I think that belongs in this part of the conversation. I've written up a piece, and it'll publish on my Substack on Sunday, actually. So by the time this is live, it'll be out there around. And I went a little provocative on the title. Let's stop arguing about AI. And really and you're speaking to what that conversation was, which is AI is a weak catch-all word for everything that we're actually talking about. We actually need to break down what artificial intelligence is doing into these other components and where it does fit into the stack, because you absolutely were right in what you were calling out. Sort of when I think of the bottom of the stack, it is the low risk, high value areas where AI is efficient. It's automation, efficiency, assistant tools, things like that. There's a middle layer where it's doing recommendation or maybe prioritization and ranking of things, whether it's in a creative workflow or it's me watching television or whatever. And then there's the top of the stack. It's delegation, substitution, authorship, potentially. Those are the most critical, and they're the most high touch human parts of it, where we're not really delegating as much as we're directing and orchestrating with assistive technologies that are going in. So there are absolutely a lot of different ways that we have to sort of carve those 2 big letters, A and I, up into all of these smaller functions. And it's different levels of ownership that we cede to it for what we're doing,
Do you have high confidence that ultimately the way it's going to play out is the way that, rather than generative AI just essentially taking over the media and entertainment business, that kind of extrapolating from what you said, it's just automating, but still you have the creative teams that are creating and able to do it faster, maybe cheaper, and then accordingly create more things?
I think we can go that direction. I don't think it's going to be a perfect marriage that gets us there. It's not going to be a clean single line straight walk. It's going to be a crooked path that we're going to learn a lot of ways not to do it as we continue to refine how we do it. But I even think I think to some of the automation that I hear about, even coming out of CES, I heard a lot of sort of agentic talk around my personal life, and this notion, like, what a dream if I could have a system that checks my email for me, finds all the bills, is tied to my bank, and just goes and pays them without me having to do it. We already have some automation around that today, but it's relatively dumb automation. It's not, in other words, if I had a really big spendy month, it's not going to go absorb that and fix it for me. This might be able to do that. But I still want it reporting back to me at all of those times. And I see creative workflows being similar to that. Things that are standard and have been done hundreds and thousands of times need less oversight. Things that are one-offs need much more high touch and need much more back and forth evaluation as to whether it's the right path. And I think the more we use the technology, the more we can both get comfortable with it and its capabilities, and we can then also make the system understand better what we actually think is a priority and what is not a priority. At the end of the day, these things, we call them smart, but they're still kind of dumb. They're really just automated, and they only do what we tell them. And unfortunately, they don't have a sense of what sarcasm and other things that we as human beings know how to grok. They're not as nearly as good at that. And so we have to speak to them more like we speak to a toddler when we're doing it.
Well, what you had written to me about that the control issue in the creative side leads to, the risk of what you called flattened creative outcomes. Yeah. And so, I violently agree with you that in order to get flattened creative outcomes will be good enough for many people and, many, companies, many people, ad campaigns, perhaps even, whatever, depending on, it may allow, many more who need ad campaigns created for them to actually get in the game and to be able to afford that. But great art still, and I think you agree with that, great art will still have human control and then implementing the tools like it's always been, new tools. So Andy, listen, I really appreciate it. There's, I'd love to continue. There's so much to discuss. Great to see you again. Yeah. Love your thoughts. I really value them all the time and really appreciate your time today.
No, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's always good to catch up with you, Peter.
Yeah, good to see you. Andy Beach, everybody. The Brain Podcast is a weekly production of Creative Media, Peter Csathy's AI, entertainment, media, and marketing, business advisory, and legal services firm. Look for it every Tuesday and follow it, rate it, and subscribe to it. It's edited and mixed by Luca Csathy with original music by Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo. You can learn more about creative media at creativemedia.biz. Until next time, keep innovating, but smartly, fairly, and in partnership with artists, not in spite of them. After all innovation ultimately flows from the brain of creators. Cheers.